All right, welcome back to another episode of Obsessed with Death. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and maybe telling people who are listening who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Kevin Devine. I'm a 45-year-old male identifying person, I guess. Lives in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, New York. And amongst other things, I guess the thing that I'm like nominally niche, public facing, potentially known by some cross section of the playground in the corner for is I write songs and sing them under my name and then as part of a band called Bad Books, which is myself and this band Manchester Orchestra. I think that's yeah, and then I'm other things too, but that's the thing that is like of some nominal public consequence, I guess,
Sure.
is that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Um, just right at the top here, Kevin's going to be in Arizona playing a couple of shows.
that's
Flagstaff
right.
specifically, tickets are still available. So if you're,
Listen, in the interest of full transparency, yeah, Flagstaff, it's cool. I've only played there once before in
yeah,
2010.
yeah,
People actually got engaged at the shows at a cafe called the White Dove, which I don't even know if it's still there anymore. But
yeah, I'm not sure.
like on our way out to play at Coachella, actually, which is crazy that that happened. But anyway, Phoenix, those two shows went pretty fast, but
Yeah,
Flagstaff, I think there's about 20 tickets left as of uh, what at 10:37 a.m. or whatever time it is by you there right
yeah,
now on
yeah.
Tuesday the 8th. So
That's fair.
yeah, come, please come. I'm begging you.
Yeah,
Come.
go check him out in Flagstaff. Before we really get into the show, there is one question that I like to ask everybody just to sort of get things started, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Is what your relationship with death is like? Is it something
Mm,
that you think about a lot? Do you worry
mm.
about death? What would you consider your relationship with death like currently?
My own or generally?
Yours specifically. Do you feel like you have a relationship with death? Is it
Yeah,
something that concerns you or consumes you at times?
about my own death. I would say, hmm, I don't feel consumed. I definitely
Yeah,
don't feel consumed. I feel, I mean, I feel maybe on the spectrum. I wonder if you even know what your actual rela relationship with your own death is until you're like at the cusp of it. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if
sure.
there's people who are like, I'm very chill and cool with all of this. And then, of course, in the moment, they're like, wait, no, 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 no. Or the reverse. People who've been like, I've been so anxious about that my whole life. And then at the moment of passage, as you're pointing at yourself, at the moment of passage, they're like, maybe they'll end up being like, beatific and calm with
Yeah,
it. I feel like, maybe my relationship to my own death has I'm maybe more aware of it in the context of having I have a 9-year-old daughter.
yeah,
So maybe it's like I'm aware of not wanting to prematurely leave that circumstance and also like thinking about like what it would be like for her. When I think about that, it's more like if something were to happen suddenly to me, like now, in the next whatever,
sure.
and what the sort of the difficulties that would visit upon her, other people too, but I'm thinking about specifically the lens of being like a 9-year-old kid having to kind of contend with that. But I would say that, it's funny, like sometimes if I'm on a plane, uh, I do sort of have some kind of, I'm sorry for not having a less eye roll inducing word for this, but like I do have some kind of like spiritual practices. And there is a part of me sometimes when I'm in moments like that where I hear myself saying to myself, either out loud or in my head, just sort of like, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there's a degree to which I'm like, you can't. And I don't think I'm like gripped by mortal fear in a day-to-day way. That being said, I also don't like fucking, I don't skateboard. I don't, I'm sober for 17 years almost. Like there are things that at various times in my life could have sped my active march
sure.
towards death that I try to do. I'm fairly like, fairly health conscious person, fairly. I mean, I eat pizza and, drink the occasional root beer here and there, but you know what
Yeah,
I mean? I'm not
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
so I think um I'm sorry if that's too much answer and at the same time not enough, but I think I would say I'm not like totally, and also given the larger social context in which we live, where there's ample opportunity to be sort of terrified about all manner of ways in which one could die.
Yeah.
I do generally think, and maybe this is like a dyed in the wool New Yorker, but I don't know. I could walk out of the apartment right now and get like hit by a bus or like and if I was to, I feel if I, for me personally, I feel like if, and then I'll shut up. If I was in active communion at all times with how close death actually is and how arbitrary and capricious the veneer between life and death actually is, I'd never leave the house. Like
Yeah.
so I guess does that an answer?
That's an answer. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well,
Well,
there you go.
well, I think, you know, anytime I've had anyone on the podcast who's a parent, the answer is always very different than somebody who is not a parent. I feel like that,
Interesting.
and it's a big part of it. Always just goes back to, well, I don't want to, not be there for my child. I want to watch my child grow up. And these are all obviously very understanding reasons to not want to die. But it is interesting in the sense of like everyone sort of has the same point of view when you have children, understandably. And it really does make the people's responses so much less selfish, I guess, because it really just
Or
just goes towards their children.
But I wonder, I mean, God, I don't have a dog in the fight about pro or not, or pro or anti-natalist, like people should or shouldn't have kids, whatever. Really, I think
Yeah,
that probably a lot more people probably shouldn't. But I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that like what more so in a certain sense through a certain lens, like what more selfish thing is there
yeah,
than having a kid?
sure.
But I also I know what you mean, and I do think yeah, I think there was like a different kind of also maybe that's like the folly of youth. I was like a way more reckless person in a whole host of regards when I was like 24 years old
Yeah,
than I am at 45 years old. But that wasn't just about having a kid. That was other stuff too. And so I definitely think that like made a reference to like, yeah, I do think I will say there's subtle ways. Like I fell off in sobriety. I like fell off a bicycle and fucked myself up once pretty good when I was like in my mid 30s. I
yeah.
don't really like bike around New York so much since I've had a kid. I know there's people who like put the kid on the back and go, and that's cool. My
It's
response to that
wild. Yeah,
was yeah, I don't know. And maybe I don't know if that's good, right, bad, wrong, indifferent, whatever, but I just know that's my orientation is that I'm like I'm not risk averse in a lot of ways, and then there's other ways in which I'm like, yeah, I'm not trying to speed the plow either. The plow's coming for all of us.
yeah,
So it's undefeated. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm with you on all of that. Honestly, like the bicycle stuff is like very much up my alley in the sense that like I am trying to avoid anything that I think can potentially cause a reason for me to die before I was essentially supposed to, or whatever it is.
right.
Some fears are probably a little bit more irrational than others. The bicycle is understandable, especially in New York. But I mean, some of the stuff that I contemplate on and maybe won't do because of, the fear of death maybe is holding me back a little bit. But
Well, not to count to interview you, but I do have a question. What
yeah,
what is it that made obviously this is the one
yeah,
birth and death. If
sure.
a person exists, it's the only it's the two ubiquitous experiences. There is not any other one. Some people go through life, even ones that we think of as being sort of like ubiquitous, they're kind of not. There's some of they end up being either elective or things do happen or don't happen. Some people think of a thing that's unifying, like, I don't know, education or romance or friendship or family, but all of them are different in a
Yeah,
sense, and not everybody shares every plank of that. Everyone's born and everyone dies.
yeah.
Beyond that, what is it that made you, because even from what you're just describing about your own orientation, what was it that drove you to be like, this is a thing I want to be in conversation with people about, you know?
Sure. And I yeah, it doesn't need to become an interview about me. I will make it that way for sure. But
Just this, you could just tell me this. Yeah, if you
yeah, of
want. I'm
course.
curious about it. Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I get too into it and I like end up cutting stuff because I'm like, they've heard me say this before. But I will say this. It's something that has consumed me to an unhealthy level for a really long time. And I could tell it was like bothering other people in my life, the amount I was talking about it.
I see.
So it was like I'd be at dinner with my friends and we'd all be having a good time, and I'd be like, do you guys? How often are you thinking about dying? Like, like, are you worried?
Hmm.
Whatever." Or I would be sitting at dinner and we would be eating, some sort of food that I saw a thing on food poisoning, and I'm like, is this gonna
Yeah.
kill? Like, it would
Right.
just there was
Right.
just times or
Invasive.
things, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like this is something I discuss in therapy and it's helped a lot, but it
Yeah.
wasn't really fixing anything. And I really just had such a desire to, I just want to talk about it all the time.
There you
Every
go.
person I ever meet, I'm like, how much do you think about death? When's the last time you thought about dying? Like, I just want to
Brilliant.
know.
Brilliant thing to then bring to the realm of podcasting because then it's like sanctioned. You could talk about it all you want. Yeah, yeah,
Well, it's even so much more than that in the sense of like I get to speak to people who are so much smarter than I am, that know so much more about it
Well, I'm
and
sorry to
can
break the streak on
no,
this episode,
please.
but
I have so many questions to get into. That's why I'm
sure.
like
All
I
right.
want to, but I do think it's important to explain sort of why we're both here right now,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I mean I have three books on my desk right now that I'm looking at that are about death. Like it's just like
Hmm.
it's a lot, and like I was saying, I feel like I was bugging my friends. I was talking about it too much. I have like a broadcasting background, so I was like this would make sense. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like I get to just have these great conversations. It's so rare that I get to sit down for an hour and just like not look at my phone and just talk to somebody.
Totally.
And then on top of that, I get to talk about this thing that is like constantly in the back of my mind. And it's the best. It's the my
It's
favorite thing I do.
exorcising. Yeah. It
It's
also feels like
incredible.
you're, yeah. Okay. Asked and answered. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Very good. I get it.
I will say there are sometimes I have conversations with people. I literally have to like leave my house afterwards. Like I have to go for a walk because it just feels so good. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's the
That's
best.
good.
Yeah.
That's good. All
Yeah.
right. Let's see if we can, if
I
we're a walk, if we're a prompt for a walk
I
today.
can
Let's
feel
go.
this is probably going to be a walk afterwards. This
All
is
right,
already
good.
pretty good. Yeah. All right. So I think we've gotten to the point of where you're at with death, right? But I do feel like there's something that I think about a lot as well is like when you first sort of realize you're gonna die and like
Totally.
processing death and how that sort of shapes you. I mean, do you have like an initial memory or is there like something that
Yeah.
sticks out specifically where you're like, I'm gonna die one day or like I'm gonna lose people? I mean, I know you've lost people, so
That's definitely the memory I have, and I know it's at least partly true because my mom, who's not got a great memory, remembers it and like
yeah,
has codified it. I remember like I must have been 6 because it was in the second place we lived. And I know we moved there. I think the summer I turned, it was the year between 6 and 7. But you know what I mean.
yeah,
And they were going out, my parents, like it was a night that we had maybe my grandma was gonna watch us. They were like going out to a dinner or something. I remember like they were like getting a little dressed up, or it was like a little more like than like they were going to, McDonald's or a pizza place or something.
sure.
And I remember having this feeling like I must have seen something or I must have made some connection that I don't know. I don't remember what prompted it, but I do remember I was like, oh, they're gonna die someday.
Wow.
And I remember writing my mom a note that I like put in on her like dresser and it said like, I love you guys and I'm gonna miss you when you die or something like that. And she was like, Jesus Christ.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Wow.
that was between 6 and 7. And I do remember that, yeah, I don't remember the first, I remember being like a teenager. This isn't quite the same thing because a bunch of death had already kind of familial and cultural. But I
Yeah.
remember like, I do remember having a dream very vividly where I like there was like a suicidal ideation dream that I had that was like, sorry if trigger warnings or whatever, but involved my like jumping off a building. And I
Yeah.
remember like when I landed, I like imprinted into the sidewalk, not like
Like a
I
cartoon almost.
yeah, but it didn't feel cartoonish. It actually was really horrifying because it almost
Wow.
I don't know why I could psychoanalyze that and think it was because and in the dream it was like, very dramatic, like tears streaming down my face or whatever. And I remember waking up being like, fuck. Because I think at the time, maybe if that's what you're moved to do, and then when you land, you're almost like there was something about landing, but like embedding into the ground that felt almost like either I'd failed or
Oh
it was
yeah.
more horrific than I'd even thought because now I was just like stuck there forever or something.
Oh wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and those are two like, but I mean, by that point, I was probably that was the third place we lived, and I was probably like 14 or something. But that came
Wow.
to mind because I don't have a conscious memory of the first time I was like, oh, I'm gonna die. But that's the first thing I remember that was like very directly about like my death, if that makes sense, or
Sure.
my
Yeah.
part in that, if that makes sense. So, um, yeah, there's that.
It's interesting that you're not so much like remembering the moment, like the the moment with your parents. Obviously, you sort of had that, but you didn't also think, "Oh, I'm also gonna die." You were just
Or
like, "Oh,
if I
my
did, that
parents."
wasn't like the part that freaked
Yeah.
me out or something. It was
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm sure there have been I mean, I don't want to leap ahead or get off track, but I know there are other times where I've been like more, um, I don't know, like actively freaked out by some like glancing connection with like my own mortality. It may be in a moment where it seemed like for a moment it was like, oh my God, is something catastrophic about to happen? I was like, I don't know, 12 or something at an amusement park with my extended family in Ocean City, Maryland. And we were going up on a roller coaster that went backwards.
Yeah.
And when as it was going up for the first drop, I like picked up my harness, like it just came off. And I was freaking the fuck out because I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. And I was like I was trying to tell my brother. And then I remember like, this sounds like bullshit. This is real. They're like, I got it to snap in. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
as we were,
Yeah.
not at the very last second, that would be
Sure.
like too filmic, but we were like,
On your way up.
70%
Yeah.
up the way up. And
Yeah.
that was an early moment of being like, I really was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And then there was like certain things that were like drug related later in life where you're
Yeah.
like, like, being too speedy,
Sure.
being like, oh, I can't, like it won't, and the hummingbird heart, and it won't, I thinking like, oh fuck, like what if it's just like
Yeah.
gives out. But you're right. Yeah, there wasn't that thing with my parents when I was a kid. That was really what I remember anyway. And again, maybe there's more to it that I don't remember. I'm sure there is more to it that I don't remember, but I don't remember being like, oh no, and I'm gonna die. It was more like, oh God, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
That's the worst. Who wants that? Yeah.
I mean, you're dreaming about it, right? So it's like whether maybe you just saw something on
Yeah.
TV or, whatever it was, maybe somebody said something, but you're obviously, there's something going on in your head at that point where you're like thinking about a version of death that involves
Yes.
yourself.
And also, when I was like, I'm sure this is part of what I don't mean to, again, like,
No, it's
I hope
okay.
I'm not prematurely moving places, but like, I do know by the time I was, and again, I claim no, everybody has their own version of this. I'm not, this is just mine. It's not,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's more than plenty of people. I'm sure it's less. I know it's less than plenty of people. Um, by the time I was like 6 or 7, my my dad's dad died and my dad's brother died kind of within a year of one another. I had a cousin that when I was a kid died really young. He was like 17, motorcycle accident. When I was became even like sort of conscious of these things. Like already my mom's dad died when she was 14,
Wow.
and my dad's mom died the year before I was born. So like when I came in, I remember thinking my dad's dad was married to my mom's mom because they were the two grandparents that were around.
Oh, sure.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
and like it's funny because my daughter, her mom and I, both of our dads are dead.
Yeah.
So Edie's got two grandmas.
Hmm.
She doesn't think they're a couple because they live in different states and she doesn't really ever see them together. But you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like there's,
Yeah.
but that is what I thought. So I do know I was like aware of death in whatever way a kid's aware of death because I knew like two of the grandparents were removed before I
Yeah.
even got in the room. And then in my life, early life, like I said, one of them, another one went, an uncle went, a cousin went. And by the time I was like 15, there was like, it just, there was a small it was gathering, which was
Yeah.
also part of my dad was older and I was like that was his second marriage. My younger brother and I were like a lot younger than some of my like eldest cousins and stuff, and my eldest
Okay.
half siblings. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of, there was a lot of that. But if that makes sense, I definitely was aware of that. Um, my own mortality, I feel like what I'm finding in this conversation is like it feels like I've had a more like I think I tend to think about things deeply suggests like I'm sort of complimenting myself. I mean, like over too much sometimes, like over perseverating. But when it comes to this, I'm like, I wonder about my own. It's more like I think maybe it's like some sort of defense mechanism in a way, or I don't know, or maybe it's something better and healthier. But it's just like I tend to have learned my experience of death tends to be through like there's been a lot of it around for as long as I can remember. And maybe on one level, that also has informed a sense of just like it's part of life. Like it's yeah, every one of those has sucked. My dad died. I had two of my brothers, my half brothers are dead. Like
Yeah.
lots of cousins, lots of uncles, lots of aunts. One of my best friends and closest musical collaborators. Like there's been a lot of it and a lot of different kinds of it. But about my own, it's funny. You've kind of prompted. I'm sort of like I don't really have right in this moment. Like I'm really trying to like excavate, and I don't have the same kind of memories of like, oh, I'm gonna die, or yeah,
Well,
I
it
don't know.
sounds like you were sort of busy dealing with a lot of other death that you almost didn't really have time to think about your own. Grief is like such a
Interesting.
powerful thing that you were dealing with it at such a young age that at least, I mean, I'm nowhere near anybody that could, you know, diagnose or come up with any sort of I can't even think of the right word for what I'm trying to say right now, but I just mean like I would think, I'm somebody that grew up with like almost no death. Like I went to like a great grandmother's funeral when I was like 10 years old, and I don't even think I realized it was a funeral. I was
Was
just
that the first one? The
that was
first
it.
funeral?
Yeah, first one.
I was
Yeah.
just thinking about that too. Like, what was I think my friend Daniel Loriano, I think his grandma died, and I used to like stay at their house after school sometimes. I think
Yeah.
her funeral, I think my mom took me to her wake when I was
Okay.
like 8 or 9.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my Uncle Bud was not long after that, but maybe that was, I was like fifth or sixth grade. Anyway, yeah, I was thinking in the context of this conversation, I was also thinking about my first like formal
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
celebration's not the acknowledgement, public formal
Sure.
gathering, ritualistic acknowledgement of death. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was an open casket, and I still didn't even put it together. I mean, I was like 9 years old or whatever it was. And it was,
Sure.
it was just a thing that like my parents made me go to kind of thing. And I didn't
Yeah,
really
like the
know.
bank or
Yeah. Yeah.
the grocery store. Yeah.
Open casket funeral, the bank, the very similar at that point as like a 9-year-old who just like wants to watch hockey. I'm like, I don't really care about anything else.
Who among us? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's my thought, I guess, on it is just like you had so much death that it maybe just distracted you from the fact that you're also going to die. And that's probably a good thing, right? You're all of your like empathy, everything went towards these other people instead of just immediate, like someone like me who would just go, "Oh my God, this person died. That means I'm gonna die." And now I'm just
Well,
like,
what, and that is interesting. I wonder if that's like an answerable question, why that is different for different people, or if that's something I wonder that if that's like where the percentages lie with nature and nurture and that. Like I know what's funny is I very much remember the different ways different deaths affected me or that I responded to them or when I found out like my brother Michael, he passed away in 1998. He was 38, I was 18, but he had a very difficult time and I think my dad was a very different dad in 1956 to 66 than he was
yeah,
in 86 to whatever 90s to
sure,
those formative years where we were both kids becoming teenagers or whatever. But like and Michael became had a lot of addiction issues and a lot of institutional, in and out of institutions, and eventually he contracted HIV and became full blown AIDS, and I remember where I was like when I found out he had AIDS, because that was almost like I was finding out he died,
yeah,
because he was, at that point it was 1994, I was 14, and it was kind of like, well, that's where this is going, it's
sure,
not. And for instance, but anyway, so there was all this stuff, but what's so funny is one of the things that was like really a death I remember having, the first big cultural death that was like a real like whoa, was Kurt Cobain when I was like
sure,
14 years old, and they were my favorite band, and I was really getting into music in earnest, and I started writing songs, and I even started playing little bands in my. And that was that, even though I knew he was like he had been he was a drug addict and he had been in the hospital, and like when he died and how he died,
yeah,
what he did, it was really like that. I remember being like, whoa, like that was a really bracing. And maybe that's also because in a weird way, someone like that's like the first one, that's like a front line. You see yourself in your family, but you see yourself in a person like that differently. You see different parts of yourself in a person like that you don't see probably in your family, if that makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah, I
And I
think
think
you could draw some differences between your dad and Kurt Cobain.
I could draw just a few. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And so, a few 100,000, but yeah, so there
yeah,
were, and then some that were not different actually, because
yeah.
people are in some ways more reducible than we think we are. But yeah, that was one that definitely, that was an event that it was weirdly, I didn't even fucking clock this till right now. That was 31 years ago today that
Was it?
yeah. And I
Whoa.
remember where I was. I
Yeah,
remember who I was, my siblings and my brothers and this was like a guy's thing. My sister's husband at the time was with us, but we used to go once a year for a few years to a Rangers game, hockey game in MSG, as like, it was like a Christmas thing that we'd then go do in the spring, Christmas present. And that night we went to a Rangers game, and then I was going back to sleep over my brother John's house. And when we got there, his wife Joy was like, "Did you hear what happened?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Kurt Cobain died." And I was like, "Oh no, he was in the hospital." And she's like, "No, he." And then she told me like he killed himself.
yeah,
And I remember like talking to my mom and dad on the phone, and my mom being like, I didn't really understand it when I was watching those. I always thought it was just kind of loud and he was yelling the same things over and over again. But now I'm watching this unplugged and it's actually really good. And he was almost like John Lennon or something, like,
wow, yeah,
and anyway, this, not to spend too much air on that,
yeah,
but that was a thing where maybe there was also something about that where he felt like he was 27, I was 14, but he kind of felt like one of your friends. And he kind
sure.
of looked a little bit more like he could be like in your peer group
Hmm.
than like, I don't know, my family did, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So that's one that I remember being like, oh, right. Like it's not just like your uncle, your friend's grandma, or even your brother who got sick and he wasn't dead at that point. My brother hadn't even been diagnosed yet at that point. He was just in and out of other issues.
yeah,
But I do remember being like, that was one that was really like, oh shit, like
yeah.
it's
Everyone.
everybody, and you don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe there's something about over the arc of a life. this is a little too, maybe this is a little too pat or a little too psychoanalytic. I don't know. But I'm like, you can either be really terrified by the lack of control we have in most arenas. Because I genuinely, at this point in my life, think the only thing I have any control over really at all is what I do.
Sure.
Because, like,
Yeah.
I don't even have any control over my first thought or my first feeling. It's not like that's never going to happen. So it's like I do have more tools to meet my thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
which then can inform my actions. But I don't have any control over when I don't even really have any control. I have some control over when I die in a negative sense, but I
Yeah.
could like run 6 miles a day. I could eat a macrobiotic vegan diet. I could, well, I mean, I don't do those things. I do versions, a little bit of them, but I don't do those
Yeah.
things. But you know what I mean? I could
Yeah.
never take a drug or alcohol again for the rest of my life. I could, and I could fucking die next week,
Yeah.
or I could be here for 100 years. And then, so I think that maybe there's something for me about the lack of control can also then there can be a freedom in the acceptance of that to some degree, to where you're like, well, then what the fuck am I supposed to do? Because like, if it's like, I remember like, I don't want to have a kid because the world is fucked up, and the world is fucked up in a lot of ways. I don't have a kid because of war and atrocity and uh, vertical power structures and climate change and militarism and imperialism and then capitalism and all these other things. That ended up not being a good enough reason. That was what I thought when I was 25 years old. When I was 35 years old, it was like an empty hallway in my brain that had been padlocked, and there was like fucking, I don't know, like radioactive sewage in front of it or something. Do
Sure.
not approach. And then
Yeah.
at some point, I realized like I didn't don't know why, but it was like all of a sudden it was like all of a sudden there was like a well lit hallway, and the door was open, and it was very approachable, and there was like a little room at the end, and I was like, oh, and I there's a crib in it or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and like now I still think a lot of the things I thought about matters exterior, but I can't imagine what my life would look like if I didn't have that kid.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean God, the worst thing to think about is of course like death in that arena. And
Sure.
I know people who move through that. My father was one of them, and I also know friends, and that's unanswerable. But I mean it more like, thank God I participated in having that kid, because it's become like the center of my fucking life in a way that I really like,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Like's way too banal a word, weak a word for that. But anyway, that's just to say, like, I don't know. I guess it's like I could either find my powerlessness terrifying and like paralyzing, or I could find and so then like I'm gonna die someday, and so I can should never leave my house again, or think of anything else but my impending death, or it's like, well, I'm still gonna get on a plane sometimes. I'm still gonna eat that third piece of pizza sometimes. I'm still gonna, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah. 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 Of course. Yeah.
it's funny. And then but it made me think too, like in COVID,
Yeah.
like maybe 6 months into COVID, I was running, and there was like a little side street that I came out of, and it kind of like connects two main streets, for lack of better language. And I was coming out of this little side street, and there was like, it's like a T,
Yeah.
and I looked as I was approaching, and I didn't see anything coming. But there was like an Econo line, like a van parked at the corner. What I didn't realize was when I got to the corner, there was a motorized delivery bike guy
Mm.
in the blind spot caused by that van, and we full on hit each other.
Ooh.
We both went like ass overhead. I like
Whoa.
flipped, and
Yeah.
he like went off his bike, and I had like black, like my side, my arms, my legs. I had like a contusion on the back of my calf. I had like a big like cartoon bump on the back of my head. I was fine. I didn't have to be hospitalized, no
Wow.
concussion, but I was like
Yeah.
tender for about
Sure.
2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was all right ultimately too. But I'm even thinking in a moment like that, like once you kind of, I don't know, it wasn't like I was like, I'm never gonna go running again. It was like, what I am going to do is like, I'm never going to run out into the street at a side street like that again. I'm going to take the crosswalk and I'm going to wait for the green light.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and even that's not foolproof. So,
No.
does any of that make sense? Like, no, I just
Of
said a bunch of
course.
things,
Of
but
course.
yeah.
I do want to go back to Kurt Cobain quickly because you mentioned that you were starting to write songs and be in bands like around that point.
Yeah.
Do you remember like the first time writing anything musically around death or about death?
I definitely wrote, I was like, when you start, you're like copying
Yeah.
shit. So I was like writing, I mean, I wrote like dark songs as like a fifth grader because I was listening to like,
Yeah.
you know, I knew who Metallica was and I had like Appetite for Destruction. And so I would also probably wrote songs that I thought were like me talking like about chicks in some cool way as a fucking 8-year old because that's what Axl, whatever.
Yeah.
And then Nirvana, certainly, like I remember listening to In Utero with my friend Mike Serro in his basement and being like, reading the lyrics. We were like laying on two couches, reading the lyrics and being like, what? Like, this is really crazy. It's so visceral, so physical, so fixated on disease and more disease than death, but death certainly in the room on that record. It's very
Yeah.
much about like the body and how it fails and all this other stuff. I think he was thinking a lot about pregnancy and death, it seems like, on that record. But I definitely was writing things that were like copping from those places, but
Sure.
not from a place of feeling. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I wrote a song about my brother when he was diagnosed, and I knew he that was coming. I remember that very well, like my first band, and we like that was like one part of a two-song 7-inch that we did, and so just song was just titled M, which was his first initial, and like that was the first thing I remember writing that was actually like from my whatever you want to call it, my from the soul, if that I felt more like skin in the game about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I remember that stuff. I remember like writing a song about my aunt who had had a stroke and was like paralyzed but did not die. And that thing kind of contemplating whatever her experience was. She lived another like fucking 20 years nonverbal
Wow.
in a, yeah, really rough, like
Yeah.
often in homes and stuff. And, and almost thinking like it would have been better for her if she had, if that makes sense, which is not mine to
Sure.
arbitrate. But,
Yeah.
and then I think, yeah, I mean, I've certainly written about my brother more than once. I've certainly written things about my father. I've certainly written things about my friend. I've certainly written things about my other brother. Like, I've certainly written things about that are probably just more conceptual about. I think I've written a little bit about my own death too. And just like kind of like, there's a song called Forgive Me My Debt that I have written for this project that hasn't come out yet with my friend Caroline. The band's going to be called Funambulist. But, that's more about like debt as a concept and like kind of one of the like the conceit of the song is like when I die, when the coil's been shed, do me one favor, forgive me my debt. Like the idea that this shit's inherited, but it's
Yeah.
invented in the first place. Like I don't want my fucking kid having to pay debt. Like debt shouldn't even exist in the first place.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
generationalizing it shouldn't be a thing. Anyway, but yeah, that's the first song I remember writing from a place that was like I'll use the word real was about
Sure.
my brother. That was like when I was 15 probably.
Do you feel like there was a point where in like your career and when you're, getting success and creating new albums and writing music all the time, was there like a point where you were like realizing how much grief was like a part of the process, I guess, or how often your brother, your dad, grief in general was popping up in like the process of writing new music?
Yeah, I think, family would pop up a lot. I remember I had a band called Miracle of 86 and then I have this project under my name. My younger brother, who's still very much alive and with us, Daniel, everyone calls him Dan, but I've called him Daniel my whole life. Like someone made a joke. I can't remember. It was someone I was friends with. Maybe it was one of the guys in the band was like, this guy's always, because there's another songwriter in the band. He was like, this guy always writes songs about the interstate, and this guy always writes songs about his fucking brother Daniel. Because like my brother's name would show up and like, and it still
Yeah.
has. It's actually
Yeah.
he's referenced half a dozen songs of mine. You know, as far as grief goes, I mean, I think as you move through my records, I think it's in there a little bit in some spaces, probably forever. But I think my dad died in 2003. A record of mine called Make the Clocks Move is like the last one he heard, but that came out after he died, like a month after he died. And, you know, that record's certainly like wrestling with certain things, 23-year-old wrestling with whatever concerns are weighing on him at the time. But like, I think from Split the Country, Put Your Ghost to Rest, Forward, Brother's Blood, I mean, every record actually has some consideration of these things baked in from that point forward. And maybe that's maybe even in ways that are less like capital letter and specific. I do think I'm like part of what I, in a general sense, am moving through. There's a kind of awareness of mortality in all of the music. I just don't think I write about it the way like I don't know, like Nick Cave or someone. I don't know. I'm trying to think of somebody who you really associate, or like a metal band or something. Where I think it's more like
Mm.
implicit or sort of like suggested. But
Yeah.
I that's about mortality in general and maybe specifically my own. But I think grief. I mean, grief's somewhere in all of those records, at least
Yeah.
from 2005 forward, you know, and I think that makes sense because my dad was a big one. Um, and you know, I think there's a lot of how I reacted to my dad's death. I was already kind of on my way with drugs and alcohol, but that was I certainly used that incident as a way to explain it to myself and others as I ventured further forth into that exploration,
Yeah.
which is not the same thing as saying it's why I was doing it. It
Sure.
just was like a wonderful way to, what do you want me to do? I mean, look what's happened to
Yeah.
me,
My dad
you know?
died.
Yeah. And now it's funny because, of course, people have died in sobriety, and I haven't responded to that by like buying an 8 ball yet. I reserve the right, but for
Sure.
today, that won't be the answer. Um, but yeah, I think grief, and I certainly think a song like Brother's Blood, which I'm none of my songs are popular the way like Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter is popular, but like I have songs that are like more popular than others in the little corner of the playground I've cultivated, and that
Yeah, of
might be the
course.
most popular.
Yeah.
And that song's definitely in some sort of central ways a grief song and an excavation of grief song and a connecting of my experience to his experience song. And also, it's not only about the specific people, my brother, I mean, it's kind of about a lot of more generalized things too through the lens of those specific people. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's great. I'm so bad. I'm so jealous of people who could like listen to music and like they just like immediately get it. You know what I mean? Like I just, I don't understand. It takes me forever to like, even if I even come close to like understanding music sometimes. And
I I think it's a bummer to like ascribe. I don't like telling people like this is exactly what this song means
yeah,
because it removes, first of all, this is going to sound like bullshit, but it's not. I don't totally fully explicitly know what a lot of my songs mean. It's shapes and colors, and I know why I write them.
yeah,
And then there's sometimes where it's like years later that I'm like, oh, that's what that I can tell you a bunch in some general sense what a bunch of them are about or where they came from. But I actually don't really like it when I hear a songwriter being like, and that this lyric means this.
yeah,
Sometimes you do that, but when someone tells you exactly how you're supposed to interpret the song, fuck that. Like
yeah,
that's not something I'm interested in as a listener or as a guy who makes them. Some are more literal than others, and some are more explicit than others. But I would say like that's not a thing you need to worry about being good or bad at because I actually think it's like kind of cool to just be able to receive things like, I don't know, elliptical, allegorical storytelling, filmmaking, paintings. I don't know. Do I look at fucking, I'm not comparing myself to him when I say this. I'm talking as a fan of things that exist in the world. I don't stand in front of like a Jackson Pollock painting and be like, this this is an expression of his anger at like some scholar can tell me that. That's cool. I'm glad that exists and
Sure.
people can go to college for art history. But like looking at that, it's so much more about like what does it evoke in you than it is
Yeah.
about like what's it mean. Fuck that. Yeah. But
All right.
anyway,
Well, no, you make me feel better for not being good at understanding music that well. And I do sort of enjoy that, right? Like there are songs that maybe at some point I think I learn what technically the song is about, and I'm like, oh, I didn't get that at all, or it meant something completely different to me, and now it's like, okay,
totally.
now that's just like for me, I guess now.
It's so
And
funny. I was listening to the comic, or I heard that's way too, what's the word? That is way too active an explanation of how this came to me. I heard in passing through like the cursed algorithm in Instagram
yeah,
sending shit at me
sure.
because I must have clicked on something he said once before. The comic Bill Burr,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's talking about like Saturday Night Live, the band Skid Row. It's 1991. They're playing this song and they're really killing it, and they're having so much fun. And he's like, and that's like the end of like fun rock music. Like the next 5 years are like all this grunge stuff and all these guys and super serious and that's funny. I mean, I'm also like grateful that a lot of that music sort of got shuffled off by this other music, but
yeah,
there is an overcorrection that can happen, and it's not like there wasn't terrible grunge music because there is,
sure. Yeah,
but in fact, most of it. But he was
yeah,
like, he quotes the the lyric from All Apologies, and he's making fun. He's like, there's no more of this fun that it becomes like, I wish I was like you, easily amused. And he's like, and I always fucking hated that lyric. I always felt like you condescending prick. You don't know what I'm like. And it's so funny because I was like, I don't think that's what that lyric's supposed to mean at all. I don't
yeah,
know. I didn't write
sure.
it. What
Yeah,
I heard was either a guy singing to his newborn daughter,
mm,
like who is just so amazed at every little thing he's doing, and it fills him with whatever joy and wonder, but sadness actually at being like, oh yeah, that's not something I can access. I wish
yeah,
I could. Or someone looking at other people who can enjoy simpler things and feeling like, God, why is that so shut off in me? That always seemed to me more like a genuine expression of like bittersweet, like longing than
yeah.
it did like, and look, there's interviews where you hear Kurt Cobain talk about people and he can certainly sound like a condescending prick. So maybe Bill Burr's right. But there's also other interviews where you hear him talk and he sounds like a person with a great amount of empathy and like self-awareness and so I think interpretation, especially when art, music, and especially art and music about death, because the truth is anyone who's alive has no fucking idea what we're talking about. What we're talking about is how the aggregated experience of personal experience being knowing people who've died, and then whatever we've absorbed in the culture about death and dying, but none of us have died yet. So I don't know. There's like an unknowable
Yeah.
aspect to it where I can't talk about. So interpretation's all that's available to us. And then like leaning on the personal experience of what it's been like to be around dying people.
What
But
about near death experience? You think people ever is that just like the brain like protecting us, or do you think people actually have like near death experiences, or like people die and come back?
you mean, do I think that scientifically, or do I think
You're
that,
just saying you're like we don't know, right? Like we don't know. No one's
oh,
actually died, but then like some people will be like, no, I died, and this is what happened.
I
Like,
mean,
do you
there
have like
are
a thought
people
on
who are
that?
declared, there are people, not evolved thoughts. So I'm kind of speaking off the dome, but I
Yeah,
feel like
sure, sure.
there are people who are declared medically dead that
Yeah,
then come back,
yeah,
are resuscitated, revived. I wouldn't venture to say that I know objectively what goes on with them in those moments.
yeah.
I think there's a credible argument to be made that they experience some kind of profound, yes, like I don't know if it's whatever that would be, if it's not neurological, yeah, some kind of
Neurological, yeah. Yeah.
neurological interior cerebral experience.
Mm,
I would imagine it's a pretty intense thing to touch that and then come back.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think about whether or not like I don't think there's a hell.
Okay.
I definitely don't know that I think I don't know what I think. I could totally understand someone being like, look, in a sense, that's the closest thing we would have
That's the
to
absolutely.
research.
Yeah.
I also could understand someone being like, sort of be that there is probably, if you and I sat down and did a research project on it, there are probably like scientific explanations for that phenomena.
Yeah.
But you could say that about, that part of what makes life fun is the debate between where does scientific explanation run
Yeah.
out of where does that end and where does our belief in phenomena beyond begin? And I think, I think it's a much cooler way to go through life to allow for
It's
some amount of that to be in the room and not just be like
yeah.
fucking Richard Dawkins shut it down. And I get it. I read all those books too. And there's a period of
Yeah.
time where I was very reactionary punk rock, atheist,
Sure.
no extracurricular phenomena. And I'm like, but I also always thought like UFOs were real.
Oh,
So
UFOs are definitely real.
yeah,
And
I think that, I think there's some stuff that I probably can't explain, or that even if you could, there might be more going on that I can see. But
yeah, for sure. There's a like a docu-series on Netflix called Surviving Death.
mm,
If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend watching it. It's very,
that's
very interesting.
that is I will definitely add that to the literal and figurative queue. I guess I don't have a queue anymore because I don't get the DVDs mailed to me. They stopped doing
There's
that.
like
But
a
yeah,
virtual queue that you
yeah,
can put
yeah.
it on.
There's a virtual
Yeah,
queue.
there's just the reason I even thought of it is because there is a story in there where this woman basically is kayaking and gets like flipped over and like jammed and is like underwater for like 30 minutes.
Oh my God.
And then she somehow lives. I don't want to no spoilers. I want you to
That's
see
okay.
it.
That's okay. Yeah.
But she somehow lives and she's able to basically tell them literally word for word everything that happened while she was basically like purple and dead
Wow.
underwater. It's crazy. But and there's like different versions of it. People like predicting their own death, reincarnation. It's very interesting. If that's your kind of thing,
Yeah, that is certainly
surviving death
fascinating to me.
on
Yeah.
Netflix is really good. Um,
One thing I will just quickly say
yeah, yeah.
in our lived experience today, I have to soon depart to go not die, but go pick my kid up from school.
Yeah, we're gonna
So
wrap up.
yeah.
We're at about an hour right now. Let's wrap things up. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Um, kind of a, I guess, I don't know, silly cliche kind of question to wrap things up with
Oh,
here,
come on.
but
Can't be.
I am a little
I doubt it.
curious. Um, if you had to pick one song, one album, or one artist, what's playing at your funeral?
Oh God. Oh wow. That's really good.
At first I was like, let's pick a song, but that's too hard. If you want
One
to go artist, we can go artist.
at my mom has been making a death playlist for me for 10 years. She sends me
Really?
songs every, oh yeah, she's like, put this one on there, put this one on there.
Wow, I love
I
that.
haven't, oh, it's cool. She's
Yeah.
no, she's like, I want it to be cremated. I want it to be this way. I want to have this, you can have a little party if you want to, and I want you guys to play
Hell
this
yeah.
playlist.
Good for her. That's
Yeah, no,
incredible. Yeah.
she's good about it. I mean, she
Yeah.
also lost her dad when she was 14, lost her husband when she was
Sure.
50, lost her mom a couple years before that. She's
Yeah.
seen a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's informed, and she doesn't seem to be, maybe that's where I get it from. She doesn't seem to be in angst about it at all.
Yeah,
She actually
she's
seems,
sending you songs to put on the playlist. That's
yeah.
yeah.
I feel like it's like Sam Cooke and the Beatles. Like I'd want stuff that I think is like that I listened to more than like, and I also think is like beautiful and not because there's records. I think like that in the Aeroplane Over the Sea, that Neutral Milk Hotel record, that's like a really beautiful death record. I think that,
Yeah.
the artist I've listened to more than anybody in my life is Elliott Smith, but I don't know if I really want that playing at my funeral. But maybe some of like, there are songs that are like, there's like stuff by him that I just think is like my favorite music that I've ever heard. And it doesn't have to be the like super dark, doomy stuff by him. There's like stuff that's a bit more like wry in a beautiful way. Like I feel like there's songs of his where it's still that, but it's like a guy at the end of the bar who's like missing a few teeth and has a black eye, but he's like smiling at you as you like,
Yeah.
asks
Yeah.
for as you like do what's it called? As you like do a shot together. Um, sing so maybe like The Biggest Lie, Clementine, that stuff could be there. Some stuff like Say Yes. Those songs are, a fucking great death song in some ways is Waltz number two. Like I love that. I'm never gonna know you now, but I'm gonna love you anyhow. That doesn't have to be about death, but that's a great sentiment to
Sure.
attach to processing that.
Yeah.
So let's go with those.
Those are great.
We'll start with those. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All Apologies is a great one
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was very sweet that apparently at his service they played In My Life by the Beatles, which I think is very sweet. Like that
Yeah.
was like he wanted that music playing when people were together, which is a good one. But yeah.
Well, buddy, this has been so much fun.
Will you go for a walk?
I'm so, yeah, we're definitely going for a walk now. I need to go
Watch
for, we need a walk for sure.
watch
Uh,
out for the crosswalks. Yeah. Be
I'll
careful.
yeah, I'll throw a helmet on before I go for
Yeah,
my walk
very
for
good.
sure. But this has been, yeah, more than I, expected. This is a ton of fun. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's
I'm
totally my
s-
pleasure.
I'm so excited to see you when you're here later this month. If you're not going to a show in Phoenix, take a trip to Flagstaff. It's not that far of a drive. Go take
April
a little trip.
26th, beautiful up there.
There you
It's
go.
pine trees and shit. You can go to Sedona. It's really nice. All right.
All right,
Thank
man.
you.
Thanks so much, buddy.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great to talk to you too.
All right. See you in a couple weeks.
All right, buddy.